Ich möchte Sie herzlich begrüßen. Wir haben heute zwei ganz besondere, zwei wunderbare Gäste. Jimmie Durham. Jimmie Durham ist einer der ganz großen Künstler, der ganz großen Bildhauer unserer Gegenwart aus Nordamerika mit indigenen Wurzeln. Und er ist auch hier in dieser Ausstellung vertreten. Deswegen haben wir ihn heute zu diesem Talk eingeladen. Mit ihm spricht Dirk Snauwaert, ein Kollege und Freund aus Brüssel. Er hat in Brüssel das WIELS Center for Contemporary Art gegründet und leitet dies seit vielen Jahren. Und wir kennen uns aus München. Er hat in München lange den Kunstverein geleitet und dort wunderbare, teilweise legendäre Ausstellungen gemacht, auch eine sehr bedeutende Ausstellung mit Jimmie Durham. Und daher kennen sich die beiden kennen sich gut und lange. Und ich glaube, es ist ein perfektes Duo für einen Talk hier in dieser Ausstellung. Thank you both so much for being here in Frankfurt tonight.
It's a really great honor to have you both here. The 6th edition of the event series of the MMK talks is called, or subtitled, Art and Politics, and focuses on the relationship of the art in relation to society and politics, in view of the profound and existential changes in these times of global crisis, and also contemporary art and exhibition praxis faces new challenges. Artists and curators are invited with a discussion partner of their choice to talk about the role of art, or rather in what sense art and exhibition praxis is reflecting on these existential changes. In the context of our Q&A exhibition, An Imagined Museum, which is inspired by Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, and focuses on qualities and processes inherent to art in relation to ideas like historicity, memory, imagination, and in which Jimmie Durham is represented by two works, Genetico and Obsidiana. We used that occasion, long overdue actually, to invite him to our series of talks. I do not know why it took us so long to invite him, because I think on one hand he's a very one of the most important artists of our times, and on the one hand, on the other hand, he's focusing on themes which are very central to the program of the MMK in general. Jimmie Durham, I think he doesn't need a long introduction, because I think every one of you know who he is and what he's famous for. But I tried to kind of make it somehow short, but still say a couple of things about your work and about a couple of 30 years you were working as an artist and activist. He's an internationally acclaimed conceptual artist, writer, poet, as well as activist. I think to add the term of activist in that list refers right away in the direction of the question which somehow is important to talk about in the context of the title of this year's series of talks, Arts and Politics, the differentiation between socially engaged art practice and activist art. I would say, I could imagine that you also talk about that later, but I would say, in Durham's case, we would talk about socially engaged art practice, and separate from that, it is important to mention that he was from 1973 to 1979 full-time involved with the American Indian movement and did not make art. Dirk Snauwaert has been artistic director of WIELS for Contemporary Art, Center for Contemporary Art in Brussels since 2005. Before joining WIELS, he was co-director of the Institut d'Art Contemporain Villeurbanne-Rhône-Alpes in France, and he was director of the Munich Kunstverein. He was also the curator of the Belgian Pavilion in 2011, and in 1993 he staged actually the first Durham retrospective in Brussels at the Palais des Beaux-Arts in Brussels, and since then again and again was working together with Jimmie Durham. So a very, very warm welcome to both of you.
Thank you. It's quite impressive. I think we should call it a day and just have a drink now. Our biographies are too heavy. But it was not a retrospective, the 1993 show. It was the first show that brought you to Europe, I think, and I'm also very happy to see you in Germany because the Künstler show brought you to this country. So actually, since then, the circle is almost complete, I would say. But maybe it gave me an idea because the title is Art and Politics. Of course, you're the person to talk about it from in a monologue way, because I think you're one of the few artists that has a real radical assent. I've always looked and listened to you with ears that echo, I think, what they call in French les enragés. You know, the 68 les enragés were not the people on the barricades; they were the real people who tried to change structures. But you also have throughout your career, the tone, also the poetry, the performances, the artwork, the writing of a radical artist in a real Anglo-Saxon way. And I remember, and then maybe we should kick off because it's I think a very important moment in your life and your career that goes back to my early memories when we were working on this co-curated show in '93. We definitely wanted to have a part of on loan of the Museum of the American Indian. And I remembered, and then you were a little reluctant to show it in Europe because you felt it was not the right context, or maybe not the exact context, I can't remember. But now you go back to the US as a genuine, well-reputed artist, as somebody who is now in the main museums. But then I remember very well also in your writing, you were writing about the fact that you were pushed to the periphery. There was no place, or there was no way for artists from minorities, who I think you are the most, I would say, important voice of worldwide today, at least from my perspective. What does it mean to you then you were pushed to the boundaries, or even pushed to invisibility? And now you're going back through the big doors. With main museums will show your work. It's also it's U.S. elections. It's Black Lives Matter. It's a lot of. It's a context that has that will affect you and will affect also the reception of your work. And I'm sure you're very well aware of why and how you accepted this invitation, I would say.
I wish I were. There's a woman named Anne Elgood from the Hammer Museum, and she just kept after me year after year. She followed me to Brazil, every place, and kept after me to do a show with her, first in Washington, D.C., and then in the Hammer. So finally I agreed. I don't want to sound bad, but I don't put much importance on these shows at all. That's mostly old work. I'll do some new work for the Hammer in Los Angeles, and then the Walker in Minneapolis, and then the Whitney in New York. I'll do some new things, but mostly it's old work. And I don't really place so much importance on old work. And I don't place so much importance on, it's going to also sound a little bad, on something like reputation, I suppose. But for me, it means more than reputation, especially when you get to the US or any place in the Americas. I think they're all the same, by the way. I think Mexico and Brazil and Venezuela, US, Canada, they're all the same. Europeans came and have been committing genocide against us for 500 years, non-stop, in every one of these countries and feel good about it. Well, my telephone is ringing. That's nice. I'm not going to answer it. What I think about, I make things socially, I try to show them socially. And then when there is a retrospective or a big show of old work, it doesn't mean so much to me. I'm pleased to sell things. I'm pleased to make enough money to buy some wine, some tortillas, this and that and the other. But I don't see it as the least criterion for art, and I don't think that you mean that. I don't mean you're implying that either. But especially in the Americas, and I have a great sympathy with all of these idiots in the Americas. They were people who were not wanted in Europe and came to the New World, as it was called, and now their descendants are just stuck there. But they're stuck there with an idea that not just art, books, music, everything, the criterion is money. How do we know a good actor? Because she's so famous, she made a lot of money. Well, that's not a criterion for acting at all, is it? I would like to be rich. I would like all artists to be rich. I would like everybody to be rich. Why not? Huh? But it's not a criterion. It's not a way to look at anything intellectual, but especially art. And it always has been in the Americas, even from the point of view of people not having any money, like Jackson Pollock. Never made any money, sold one painting for this, that, and the other. Great, fantastic, stupid stories that has nothing to do with art. The money, one way or another, has nothing to do with the art. Just like a book. You want to read the book or not read the book. You don't care about the money that the author makes with the book. Sorry, I'm going on so much about this, but...
Yeah, but it must mean, it is a recognition of your artistry. As an artist, it's not given to everybody, as we know, that they make a solo show on the whole career span. Maybe you're not interested in retrospectivizing, but if you have a practice of museography, that's also, I remember in the early 90s, you were one of these artists who challenged the criteria of museums that were typologizing, just using kind of abstract definitions to put things into under labels. And with your practice, you kind of ironically, or with a lot of humor, you made it into completely fictional, but also very transliterary, because there's always a form of writing. Your exhibitions, they seem very similar to text to me, and
I see, yeah.
Because there's also something with the piece here. There's a performance, because I remember Jimmie always had this anecdote that he came into art because he saw Jim Dine drinking his paint and in a university gallery somewhere in the early 60s. I never knew that Jim Dine did such performances, but it's a hell of a way of wanting to be an artist. But that's also connected to this radical, the kind of inception of art as a means to radically change something in aesthetics, but also in society. You're kind of participant from that generation, and I can imagine that for the US, you're kind of a legal and continuation of Jackson Pollock to now, which must be a strange feeling for somebody who has been excluded for so long.
That certainly is a strange feeling. It's not very believable, finally, that, and I think it's probably not even true yet. Maybe when this show finishes next year, or 2018, maybe I will be well known in the U.S. I'm not now. Most people in the U.S. in the art scene don't know anything about me, don't care anything about me. I'm famous in Europe, isn't that nice? It's much better for me. But when you talk about Jim Dinan, I saw in the 60s a Klaus Oldenburg show too, which was fantastic. Didn't look like art. I didn't know what art looked like, but that didn't look like art. But what I like most about life is you get to live and participate. This is the most beautiful thing. You get to participate, and participation is always kind of like troublemaking. That's what it is. If you just sit back and look, you're not really participating, are you? If you just passively accept what's happening, but if you are participating, then you see opportunities to speak, to act, to do something one way or another. And this is what Dirk and I talked earlier about the show I did in New York called The Museum of the American Indian. Well, I lived in New York for a long time, and in those days there was a museum called the Museum of the American Indian in New York City. And I thought that was the goofiest name. I assumed it meant me. Who else would they mean? But it was like an old-fashioned way of speaking English. You wouldn't say the Museum of the Negro. You wouldn't say the Museum of the French person. You wouldn't say the Museum of the Chinese guy or something. So it just seemed very strange. And it was a silly museum. I also tell Dirk when we were having some wine earlier, they had in this museum a shrunken missionary, an entire missionary, beautifully shrunken from here to here, flowing blonde hair, beard, big fingernails, big toenails, everything else was doll size. But the idea of a museum is almost always super strange, so that you do want to say something. You do want to say, what is this about? What's going on with this? And you want to say it to the world that might listen, whoever might listen, but I want to speak in ways, or whatever I do, in ways that are kind of like directed. I want to say pointed, but not pointed, but where I'm not just speaking into the wind, if you see what I mean, where somebody might hear and might do something. That's what is rewarding to me to live.
Yeah, but let's go back to this typology thing of museums, because I think it was important. It's maybe important to set back. And I think it was also the reason why we invited you, because it was in those days it was the time of, let's put it. The word was called institutional critique. Whitney programish kind of or connotated thing. It was about being frames put on things and things being framed out. You are part of a generation of people, of our artists, who actually also ironically pointed out the double, I would say, edge of that it was through its whatever the tautological definition of art can only speak about art, and so that there was a whole production of material culture, if you want to use the ethnographical word, because that's how we actually pushed things aside, putting things in ethnographical or anthropological categories. You actually brought in the way anthropological museums were acting on material culture in relation to what actually the Fine Arts Museum was also doing, and thinking that they were doing something much more, I would say, emancipatory or more liberating. I mean, the other names, of course, are David Hammond's Fred Wilson, and the pieces that were echoing to us as some new voice that was talking to us from a corner of the room where we did not know there were artists producing, because, of course, what you wrote then in those years, everything was connotated from a kind of craft perspective. Everything was always related to craft, and I think, I mean, if you look at the career span you have now, up till now, there's something that intrigues me a lot. That is the way you treat materials, or if materials or words or images or everything. You treat them in a way as if they are, as it was said in the introduction, to define what the nature of every individual thing is. I mean, it's a big abstract leap, but from let's say from the repressive point of view of what a museum does onto things by putting them into frames, how to get out of that, because I think that's, for me, that was one of the most political stances your let's say generation brought into a Western kind of perspective.
I hadn't thought of it exactly that way, but I see what you mean. I remember seeing, for example, this Museum of the American Indian. It was way up in the northern part of Harlem in New York. And I had not been to many museums. Maria Teresa Alves, who I've been with for 35 years, took me to the Guggenheim, to MoMA. I'd never been there before. I'd lived in New York. I'd never been there. I knew Paris, I knew London, I knew Geneva. I just didn't go to museums there. I didn't go to art galleries. I had a different kind of life. But when I saw this Museum of the American Indian, and saw that they had like 500,000 pair of beaded moccasins that they didn't know what to do with, and they had this stone and glass building holding all these things in some mausoleum, not a Holocaust museum, but like a celebratory Holocaust or something, like something really horribly nasty. Then I started thinking, well, when we say a museum, what is it that we are saying? And how is it we are doing it? And much later in life, I saw two museums that didn't do that kind of thing. One is in Caracas, and it was named after a man who was still alive at the time, Jacobo Borges Museum. It's in a vast slum of 1 million people, and it had been a prison, and they knocked down the prison because there was too much trouble, and then it became a museum of this artist, and it was the only public place in this ghetto in Caracas of about 1 million people. So the museum, and I think it probably still does the same, and through all these troubles, it has grounds and places for all the football teams to meet and practice. It teaches people to do computer work, languages. It has a local artist agenda and an international artist agenda. And it's not even visible in Caracas. No one in Venezuela has ever heard of this museum, except all these people there in the slum. And the other is in Ghent, when Jan Hut was running the SMAC. He always had weddings. There were Africans in Ghent who didn't have another place to have a wedding, and they would have a wedding at the SMAC. It was marvelous. Artists came and cooked on Thursday nights once a month or something like that. An idea that the museum was not to brag, but to participate, if you see the difference, what I mean. That it wasn't to say, yes, here, look at me, I'm the museum, but to participate in life. And it seems to be less and less true, but more and more true is what I was talking about earlier, fame and fortune, so that a museum can brag about, last year we had X number of thousand visitors, which means nothing one way or another. What would that mean? Like, it's just another thing about money and so on, popularity away from intellectuality, let's say, away from what a museum could be doing.
Yeah, but that puts up, of course, the eternal question of context and decontextualization. The museum is the machine of decontextualization, as we know that it has. That's the way it has operated throughout history. But as a living and thriving artist, museums. I mean, the space I run, I think the museum here also, you try to design a kind of context of where contemporary art has its practice. Part of its practice is perception and reception of enunciations of artists or articulations of artists. So it's a kind of prolongation of one element of the art world. But you, as a I would say, an important person of minority or migratory groups of people, how to maintain a context with these living and thriving and problematic everyday contexts. I saw, for instance, when you were in Sydney, I saw people from the Aborigines community coming up to you and living and working with you as a very automatic. It was like you were the hero also. You were a kind of symbol figure, which of course we could talk about the difference between, let's say, the messianistic figure of Joseph Beuys, which is also one of your favorite, let's say, references that should throw in as a Eurasian metaphor. But also, I'm sure if you go back to, or if you're in Berlin, you also have a lot of people who are from the diaspora that are constantly in contact with you. I'm sure it's the same in Naples. So, how to connect the fact that you have, I mean, you also produce artworks that are going in that decontextualized context, and then have no, I would say, immediate effect or immediate impact or immediate dialogue with the living and thriving struggles of these different groups?
I don't really know, but when I think about being politically active, I was born in a politically active family, and I was always political all of my life, even now. And Maria Teresa and I do things in Mexico, in Ecuador, in Brazil, some in Canada. But in my way of thinking about politics, I do radical politics every day, all the time, simply because I think there is an idea about politics where people think if you're political, you want to change the world, you're going to change the world. But I came from a very privileged family. We fought for many hundreds of years, lost every battle. So we never won anything all these years. I think to be politically active and to be politically radical is a daily and hourly way of being, so that your being will never change the world, because one person doesn't change the world, but many people over many hundreds of years might change the world. So that me and everybody is not, we don't have the weight of, it's got to change in my lifetime, because it's not going to change in your lifetime. Maybe it's going to get worse, but if we're still going, I think this is radical. I think this is political. If I'm still going, then things are someday going to change, probably. So what I mean is I keep working, and I don't ever try to consciously be changing things or constantly try to be radical, but always just participatory as an intellectual being, as humans are, and keep going.
In one of the last talks in Brussels, you said that you hoped that in 100 years there would be still a lot of you around, and that was the victory. That would be a big victory.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
Because it was about survival, about still being alive. But there's something. Maybe we should go a little bit to your art, because I think you've achieved also lots of things, which means that one of the things that I think is a treatment of materials you use. Maybe just to start with, I'm always fascinated by the fact that you use a kind of in your text or also in the titles to go back to an origin of things. And there's I think a fabulous parallel between a kind of a wordplay of like Heidegger would do, to go back to the Greek and then the Celtic, and then you take a word and you just go, and your texts are incredible ramifications of world history and of how things have been used and how things have been misunderstood, and how that misunderstanding generates, the last Documenta piece had a small wordplay on things, but you have a lot of texts like that, because that's let's say a highly intellectual, almost philosophical, grounded discussion, and one would have associated you with something that anthropologists would have called bricolage production. Huh? You are the artist of what ethnographers called the knowledge of the bricolage. Huh?
I think I was very lucky in my childhood education. I had a very privileged education. every single school and every single teacher were nasty, lying, racist bastards. And this was a great privilege. I had to question everything. And I knew, as children know, they're not telling what happened, they're telling lies. So then I started thinking, well, if they say Andrew Jackson was a great man, and my family knows Andrew Jackson was a no-good murderer, then I will study why they think that, why this poor, badly paid woman teacher wants to inflict that kind of stuff on a child. So it gave me a way of thinking, maybe, about the world. Oh, that reminds me, I want to interrupt us. When you're talking about seeing things differently than what we have been taught to see them, and we see how strange the world has become, many people are now saying humans are not the center of the world, of the earth. We are one animal among other animals, and one kind of life among other kinds of life, trees, flowers, and everything there is part of our entire beingness. So what we have now is very many young artists making some little thing about I can't give a good example without accusing some young artist, and I don't want to be that bad, but making art type things that call attention to themselves, knowing this instead of calling attention to the situation, making themselves more famous for saying some key words that are the current keywords or something like that. You see what I mean?
The Anthropocene discussion, is that what you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you've become also one of the main actors in that discussion, as you know.
Yeah.
It's very funny, isn't it? That you had to live up to the computer age to become also one of the prophets of animism.
Yeah.
But I know you don't use computers, so you're still saved from that. But let's because I like to. I mean, I like this parallelism between, of course, the question of origin and where it is also in the art world considered. Originality and authenticity are these kind of two pair words we can use. After, I think, the categorization into styles or modes or schools or all these words of trying to describe what art production was actually before and what it distinguishes from, let's say, everyday fabrication. Because artists were going into everyday so close into everyday technology that it was almost undistinguishable from the banal. But then you have the word, of course, origin and originality, which is, of course, in your case, from minorities, it was always one of the ground reasons, because you were not in the paradise, so the whites were in the paradise, and so you, by the Bible, you were excluded of all possible salvatory stuff.
Lucky.
And because in your, and it's something I've been observing over the last decades, you have a tendency to go to kind of the origin of things. Yeah. Not just in your writing, but also in the way you manipulate materials and how you denude them, how you just go to the spine of something. Is that a very conscious, or is it just
no,
intuitive?
I don't think it is conscious at all. It's just you see this and you say, how did they been to that metal, and what is that shininess? Is that the metal, or is that a chromium on top? And where is the chromium? Where did they get that chromium? You just ask these questions. When you look at things, you say, what is this thing I'm looking at? I think it is, I don't want to say natural, but close to natural. When one person looks at another person, Mick Tausig says, you don't look at another person's face, you access another person's face. This is computer language. But when we look at other people, we try to read the expressions and the concerns in what's going on. But I grew up knowing to do this with other animals, most certainly, and with anything that's there, you try to see what's the concern, what's the intention, what's going on.
Yes, but maybe you should push it a little bit more. For instance, the piece you have here, obsidian, and then it's of course it's glass, but it's the product of it has not become mineral. It's very strange, I would say, effect of things on things. Yeah. And the way you kind of also treat it, you have a shining surface, and then you have a very labored, certain technology applied to it, which makes it look less, I would say, less beautiful, because there's the one surface where technology has been applied upon looks less, the form is less fluid, definitely. So it's you could say it's bricolage, but it's also it's a very sophisticated form of applying technological procedures that you kind of also put one next to another and looking what their effect is. I don't know. It's not just intuition. I don't believe you.
I don't know what it is, but it is a constant with me. It is as though I wouldn't know how not to do that. And I've been cooking almost every day of my life for 50 years. And not because I necessarily like cooking. I'm not a celebratory cooker. But I cook because I want good food, and I know how to make good food, and restaurants usually don't, and Maria Teresa doesn't cook at all. And then when I cook, I see what are the ingredients, why are they the ingredients, how to use these ingredients. And I think I just do it with everything without really thinking about why I'm doing it.
But it is still the question of the nature of things. I mean, so it's a word you've pronounced before. I think it, of course, origin and nature have a strange, it's a strange dualism there. It gets very theoretical and very philosophical. If we, I'm not skilled enough to deliver, but it seems to me that this is, and I think it's hugely political, because it goes back to whatever the roots of things or the foundation of things. And is that a trajectory you're going? Because it seems to me that you've been, in those works, you just work on how institutional and how kind of ideological things have been constructed, and you just also left that chapter behind you and just went into trying to figure out how things are put together and how they are altered by whatever conditions or milieu has upon them.
I think it is always that. I think that is always the root or the energy of my life. What's going on, I say. it's not what looks like going on. Something else is going on. So I want to see what's going on. But I don't know how to explain it more than that.
Well, maybe you should. You're also working on. You get the Kaiserring in Goslar, which is something mythological almost. So for a Eurasian artist like you, who's been reunifying both parts of the continent, it must sound like it's not Charlemagne. It's Alexander the Great kind of mythology almost. No. So what's because I know also that as you pointed out before, every exhibition is a kind of contextual exercise. I mean, we see many pieces that are individualized and that are thrown out of the group of works they belong to. Every exhibition is a exercise. So what are you thinking of this Goslar Kaiserring kind of presentation?
Well, that's a good thing to talk about. Thank you. But first, I want to say, in connection with Goslar, I bought a book in English. It's an old textbook from the 60s, I think, and it's called Physical Chemistry. And I bought it because I would like to know a little chemistry, but also, that's a weird title, isn't it? Physical chemistry. What else is there? Spiritual chemistry? Unnatural chemistry? What? It's a weird idea. So I'm going to read it and find out. But before getting this ring, I'd never heard of Goslar, and I still think it's in some forbidden part of Germany that people are not allowed to go to. And I went there, Kai and I, and Maria Teresa, and I saw that they have a great big mural painting in the old emperor's house. And in the painting, there is a cutting down of the tree. And a woman explained to me that this tree was the symbol of the center of the world until the Braunschweigers came and chopped it down and said, oh, this is what they say, the prince said, anyone who wants to be Christian can become Christian. Anyone who don't will be killed, as they were cutting down the tree. So they cut down this tree that's at the center of the world, and it's in the painting. And up in the Harz Mountains, they still celebrate the idea that there were witches. And in Goslar and other towns around, they have Halloween witches for sale and witch mask and so on. So I had those two facts, and I thought, what do they mean? What do they mean with this tree of the center of the world? And then, even more, why are witches so funny? And I asked everybody I knew, what is a witch? It's a very bad, mean old woman. Why a bad, mean old woman? And then I started thinking more. Okay, what does this witch have? She has a broomstick. Now, Ian McKellen, in the film called The Lord of the Rings, yeah. He was an old man. He didn't have a broomstick. He had a staff. Guys get to have staffs. Moses had a staff. A woman has a broomstick. Why do we decide it was a broomstick? Because we say these women were holdouts. Maybe they were midwives. Maybe they knew some herbal stuff. Maybe they were good cooks. And they were persecuted. To the extent that all of Europe knows what a witch is. A witch is a bad old woman. So I said, okay, I'm going to do a tree in Goslar, and I'm going to do something about a witch. I'm not going to show a witch because it's too silly. I wouldn't be good at it. But I want to do something so conceptual and so unconceptual at the same time that it's about a very specific situation in one part of Europe that I already know from having lived in Switzerland, the very same thing with Swiss mask and carnival and so on, and how one group of people come and take over and they impose their own mythology, which in this case was European Christianity. It's already strange enough, huh? So I don't want to expose the situation. I don't want to educate people, but I want to interest myself doing this. I want to show to myself something that I might be able to do there that people could look at and talk to me about, that I could participate in Goslar, in other words.
Have a dialogue.
Yeah.
Not to bring back the witches.
Yeah, not to bring back the witches.
Why not? Shamanism is also part of...
What if it's still there? What if there still wise old women there with staffs called broomsticks? Up in the mountains there could be.
Because there's always a remnant in society of vernacular knowledge.
And there's always something that slips away from the known power. Anything, any words, any group of anything, it's always there, this slippage into some freedom. This is marvelous, I think.
And that's what you're bringing up to the forefront.
Wouldn't that be nice if I could do that?
It definitely is. But then you should maybe recite a poem or something, sing a song, because that's what you're also, as a performance artist, you can do that.
Maybe. I did a poem in Italian a couple of months ago because Mario Pironi has some land in Toscana that his mother gave him. And it's a small piece of land that's just forest. So he said, okay, this is an art forest. I'll leave it as it is, except we'll do art things there. So we had a opening day, I didn't come, with mostly poets reading poetry about whatever they wanted. So I wrote a poem in Italian about trees in Italy. And a young woman actor read it so beautifully. It was, I got a video of it. It was just marvelous. So maybe I will write a poem in Old Saxon language and see what happens. I did a song in kind of High German in this show close to Cologne.
Durham.
Yeah. Would you like to hear this song? Yes. Maybe I can. The idea is that, let me see it in English. Reason is the guide, the Godhead, the song says, of the literate intellectuals. Literate intellectuals think that reason is what intellectuality is, that there must be reason for everything. So that's what the song is. And we know it's not true because we know that the works of Beethoven have no reason. You can't say, what does that mean? And get any answer. You just love it. And this could be true of any poem, any art, anything. I'm trying to jabber, see if I remember the words of this song.
Well, you did it at the opening as a thank you. I remember that, but I didn't understand the word. So.
Der Sinn ist die Gottheit, die Gottheit, die Gottheit. Der Sinn ist die Gottheit, des Reflektierenden. The last word I forgot.
Maybe
Alphabetten. Sorry.
Maybe we should throw it out to the floor. Maybe if some people we have the privilege to have you among us, which is I guess rare.
Nice idea.
Because I don't want to monopolize the microphone. Maybe some people have questions or remarks to Jimmie. Don't be intimidated.
Are there some questions? Okay, then I would perhaps start, because you talked a lot about, actually Dirk tried a lot about talking with you about the way you use objects, and you, in the beginning you said you take objects out of their context somehow, or you kind of try to take them out of their context, and I was asking, and I can put it in a different context, and I was asking me, for me it was, in case of your work, it's there's different levels. On the one hand, you still keep the objects in their context and kind of shift them around to look at what they actually tell about their context, and then on the other hand, you also take them out of their context, put them in a different context to see what's what they mean in this different context. And this kind of different kind of stages of a process talk or reflect on the dynamics, on all the dynamics they were part of. Would you?
Yeah, that's certainly true. I mean, I like the energy, the public energy, when something is out of place. I like it very much. I sang a song just now, but when I lived at home, when I was in the American Indian movement also, anytime I'm in an Indian community and we have a talk, some people get up and talk for 3 hours, some people sing a song. And there's no difference in it, except it does give a vibration, it gives an energy to the group, to the meeting, that I like very much. And if I had a dog that I brought here, just having the dog here would give a different energy to us. Not something big or important, but something all the same. So it's another thing of, well, I just live my life that way.
Are there some other questions? Then I would like to thank you. Don't you have anything of his work in your computer to show us a few?
That was a Venice Biennale highlight, but that's one of your machines. No, let's do this one. This is one of my favorites. This is a Arc de Triomphe for personal use. But you did it first in Istanbul, didn't you?
I did it first in Istanbul, and I painted it turquoise because that was Turkey. And they didn't like it in Istanbul. And the curator is a good friend. I forgot her name again. Spanish woman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's
But
cool.
she didn't like it. Nobody liked it. And that was true with the work I did in France also. I think we saw some photos of it. I had a refrigerator, and I threw stones at it every day for a week or so, 10 days, until I changed the shape of it. And nobody liked it. I put it in many shows, and then I put it in the Venice Biennale. Suddenly it sold. So I thought, I like the Venice Biennale. I want to always be in the Venice Biennale. But the piece just before that was made for the Venice Biennale. And it's that same woman, this marvelous Spanish woman. Oh, I'm so stupid with names. Well, I have a friend who says, whenever you're in a big show, do something very simple. When someone tells me to do something very simple, I can't do it. I can't think of anything very simple. So I try to think of the most complex things I can think of instead. And that's what I did with this piece that I called Something, perhaps a fugue or an elegy, something very complex, and you don't know what it's about.
It says end at the end.
Yeah.
But for instance, in the Istanbul piece, it was a very tense moment, I think, politically when that Biennale happened. How was that received? I can imagine it was very military, Kurdish problem in those years. The communists were being
It was,
chased.
but you didn't really see that anywhere. As usual, in the art world, it's as though the art world likes to pretend, and the rest of the world likes to pretend that the art world is away from normal reality. So we didn't see much of it. Only I had an assistant the first day I was there, and he was a young guy who did jazz music. And so we talked about jazz and about music and so on. And then we were walking into the main place, and I picked a marigold flower and put it in my buttonhole. And he quit. He didn't want to work with me anymore because it looked homosexual to put a flower in your buttonhole. And he didn't like homosexuals. So I didn't have an assistant after that. Just another silly story, sorry.
Or maybe you can, because there's this text I was reading, preparing this a little bit on the Trump Tower in 1986. And this reminds me of you have a lot of oil references in the texts, and this piece comes up. It's also for the Venice Biennale, I guess. It's crude oil barrels.
If you look at practically any commercial film from any country, it's got these oil barrels in it. They're in every every film has to have oil barrels. Why? Nobody knows. They show authenticity of the warehouse, of the this, of the that. They're a sign of authenticity in the world for some ridiculous reason. And when I was teaching in Venice, one of my students said what I didn't know, that most modern clothes, most new fashion clothes, are made of one form or another of PVC, polyvinyl chloride, which is made of petroleum. So then I started thinking, what all we have that's made of petroleum? Our world is suddenly made of petroleum because of so many plastics, but so much energy comes from petroleum, so much everything. It is as though we have tied ourselves to petroleum and we don't like to know it. We don't want to think about it. And every 10 years, we start to have a shortage, and then we discover some more. So it seems there's really a lot of petroleum out there, and we're intent on destroying the entire world so that we have more air conditioning, more plastic, more of this, more of that, and the other, all running on petroleum. And we don't want to know that. That's weird to me. I want to say, look at all that stuff. Oh, and with these oil barrels also, when they sell petroleum to us, they sell it nicely instead of dinosaur juice that's going to burn up your car or burn up this or the other. Put a tiger in your tank. And the first oil company I knew about was in Oklahoma, and it was called Humble Oil Company. It changed its name because they were convicted of a crime in the US, and they couldn't have that name anymore. So guess what they call themselves? Esso. Now it's called Esso. But they used to be Humble Oil Company.
But the Trump Tower apparently was already a figure of adversity in the mid-'80s.
Yeah, I wrote this little book in '85 because his tower in Manhattan was just been built. It was being built at the same time. And I had a bunch of Cubans staying with me in Manhattan because they didn't have a place to stay. And the book says that I sold Trump Tower to 2 of these Cubans. So it's about how Cuban communists took over Trump Tower with a lot of silly art stuff. I didn't expect much. I expected Trump would be another rich real estate guy like Helmsley before him. He was famous in New York. When Trump Tower was being built, the Helmsleys were the big monster realtors in New York, not Trump. But I thought he would come up and get his level as a rich New Yorker. I didn't realize he was going to run the free world pretty soon.
And this is actually, I think, the beginning of your conscious presence in Europe. This is Malinche, of course. It's a part of an installation because it's only one element of a bigger installation.
Yeah.
That was done, I think, for America, Bride of the Sun, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's where it was first. Yeah. She, after America, Bride of the Sun, she came back to Mexico where we were living, and I had a show in London, and she became Pocahontas for a couple of years. Because I think it's the same character. And this is another thing about just looking at what's being done and what's being said, looking at what's going on instead of what they say is going on. Pocahontas was kidnapped, taken to London, made pregnant by John Rolfe, married John Rolfe, and then tried to take her infant son back to Virginia, where she was from. She died along the way. But it had nothing to do with John Smith. John Rolfe kidnapped her, took her to England, and married her. And he was a kidnapper and a rapist, and ultimately a murderer. And the story of John Smith and Pocahontas that then became a stupid Walt Disney movie is just dirty and nasty. And it's the same with Malinche. But everyone in Mexico knows that Malinche was a very bad woman because she betrayed her people by being the slave of Cortez. A little silly, in other words. So I wanted to think about Cortez and think about Malinche. So I did a letter from each of them that was like part of a diary. And I had around my house some beautiful old guava wood. You know, the guava fruit is one of the best fruits in the world, but the wood is beautiful, rich hardwood. So I carved her head out of this kind of wood. And it was again trying to, when I sculpt that way, when I carve or when I carve this way, I'm trying to investigate. I'm trying to see how me and that material might do something that would be not like Malinche, but like we might join in her predicament in some way. So it feels always very intimate to me to actually sculpt things instead of dropping a stone on a car. You don't feel intimate about that.
That's your rivalry with these Jim Dine drinking his paint.
Yeah, exactly.
I saw that stone and I thought, oh, he's doing a New York performance art for the 1960s.
Yeah.
Or land art, for that matter.
Yeah. Thank you again.